The city's latest daily COVID tally below 4,000. The health chief says there is room for consideration of relaxation of social distancing measures. And Wang underscores Beijing's commitment to its claim to Taiwan at the UN General Assembly. Hello and welcome to TVB News. Hong Kong reported 3,897 new COVID cases today, including 117 imported infections. That's more than 1,000 cases fewer than yesterday. 10 more COVID patients died. A government medical advisor warns that possible influenza outbreaks may pose a bigger threat than COVID to the city's young and old this winter. Jackie Lin with more.
The city's latest COVID tally slipped to a new low since late July. More than 85% of the cases are suspected to carry the BA.5 Omicron subvariant. Starting Sunday, health authorities suspended the daily 4:30 p.m. pandemic press conference. But this winter, another looming public health risk may be on the way. That's according to government pandemic advisor Dr. Ivan Hung. He says the inoculation and infection rates for COVID are high in Hong Kong, but a very different story for the flu. With a low vaccination rate, Dr. Hong worries about a major upsurge in influenza cases as travel curbs ease.
Overall, the community antibody is very low, and that, of course, with the relaxation of the infection control measures and also the social distancing, there will be a very high risk, especially very young children who have not encountered the influenza virus before.
He also reminded the public that after recovering from COVID, weaker immunity could make one more susceptible to the flu and severe complications such as pneumonia. With that, the HKU professor urges vulnerable groups, including young children and the elderly, to take not just the COVID jab, but also the flu vaccine as soon as possible. The Society of Hospital Pharmacists added that people can receive the flu and COVID vaccines at the same time, and the combined side effects won't be more serious. Meanwhile, Executive Council member Ko Wing-man says the hospitalization rates for COVID patients and the number of severe cases have gone down compared with a month ago. Rejecting claims that the administration is lying flat or just trying to let things be in its anti-pandemic policies, Ko stressed the government had thought it through before easing travel restrictions. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Starting at 6 a.m. tomorrow, Hong Kong will officially do away with compulsory hotel quarantine. Travelers arriving in the city from overseas and Taiwan are required to undergo 3 days of medical surveillance at home or in a hotel. Speaking with TVB News, Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mao said there is room for consideration of relaxation of social distancing measures. But he noted there is no set timetable for a further reduction of quarantine measures. Timothy Lee tells us more.
Starting at 6 a.m. Monday, inbound travelers from overseas and Taiwan will no longer have to undergo compulsory quarantine at designated hotels. Still, they will be subject to 3 days of medical surveillance at home or at hotel, but they can leave their residences for work and school if they are not infected with COVID-19. However, entry into restaurants is not permitted during that 3-day period. Speaking to TVB News, Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mao pointed out that a further relaxation from the current 0+3 quarantine measure to the complete scrapping of medical surveillance will require more observations.
I think the direction is clear. We are going to improve our connection with the international world and to boost up our economy. But we have to consider more data from 3+4 to 0+3, we have data to support and to make sure that the imported cases are not creating a healthcare hazard. So we will consider the data again after we have sufficient information, and we will then consider the next stage.
Although Lo acknowledged the current trend of the pandemic is on the decline, he believes that getting rid of all quarantine measures in the near future is unlikely. He cited the sustainability of the healthcare system as a key factor in deciding any form of relaxation. Low added that the virus's impact on healthcare systems continues to place a strain on efforts to try to lift quarantine measures between the SAR and the mainland.
Now, quarantine-free, by quarantine-free means that you don't need any hotel quarantine, and you may not need any testing at all. Quarantine, there are different measures for quarantine. But looking at the current situation, I think it's not just, the border is not just from the Hong Kong side. We have to consider the situation in the mainland. And in fact, the mainland has different considerations in terms of this healthcare system, the strength as to whether the healthcare system can sustain. So I would not guess or try to make an assumption as to when the border will be completely quarantine-free. But I must say it's not a very realistic option in the short term.
The Secretary for Health reiterated that while the virus may continue to coexist with Hong Kong society, the government has not altered its stance on fighting the pandemic, including trying to reduce the number of infections. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Financial Secretary Paul Chan expects the city's export and financial markets will continue to be impacted by jitters at the global markets. In his blog post, Chan wrote that the export figures to be announced for August have further worsened after 3 months of contraction. This as monetary policies around the world have been tightened, which further weakened the momentum of growth globally. The rise in borrowing costs also led to more pressure on asset prices. On a bright note, the finance chief says Hong Kong citizens should seize the opportunities to help boost the city's economic recovery brought on by the easing of travel restrictions. At the United Nations General Assembly on Saturday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi underscored China's commitment to its claim to Taiwan. Also weighing in on the Ukraine war, Wang says China supports all efforts that could be conducive to the peaceful resolution of the crisis in Ukraine. Jackie Lin with more.
This is Wang Yi's first in-person appearance at the UN General Assembly after 2 years of virtual speeches by China's top leader. The Chinese foreign minister gave another strong remark on the Taiwan issue. Only when China is completely reunified can there be enduring peace across the Taiwan Strait, Wang said. He added Beijing would continue to combat independent separatist activities while taking forceful steps to rid any external interference, and anyone who gets in the way of the efforts towards peaceful reunification would be crushed by the wheels of history. He says the One China principle is a fundamental rule of international relations and consensus recognized by 181 countries. Another spotlight in Wang's speech, China's stance on the 7-month-old war in Ukraine. He says the pressing priority was to work towards peace and facilitate talks, while calling on all parties concerned to keep the crisis from spilling over. Also spoken at the United Nations General Assembly was Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Lavrov decried the Western alliance for seeking to expand influence further into other regions. They include Asia, South America, and Africa, with a special mention on the U.S. promise to offer military support to Taiwan. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
North Korea today fired a ballistic missile towards the sea off its east coast. This came ahead of planned military drills by South Korean and U.S. forces and a visit to Seoul by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. South Korea's military says it was a single short-range ballistic missile fired from near North Pyongyang province just before 7 a.m. local time. The missile flew about 600 kilometers at an altitude of 60 kilometers and a speed of Mach 5. After the launch, Seoul and Washington reaffirmed their readiness to respond to any threat or provocation from North Korea. Just 2 days ago, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan arrived in South Korea. The carrier is set to participate in joint drills with South Korean forces for 4 days starting Monday. It's the first time North Korea has carried out such a launch since it fired 8 short-range ballistic missiles in 1 day in June. That led to new American calls for more sanctions against Pyongyang for violating UN Security Council resolutions. U.S. President Joe Biden will not attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, leaders meeting in Bangkok later this year due to a family engagement. According to broadcaster Thai PBS, the White House has informed the Thai embassy in Washington, D.C. that Biden has delegated Vice President Kamala Harris to represent him at the meeting. The event will take place on November 18th and 19th. Still, the report says Biden will join the G20 summit in Bali on November 15th and 16th. His visit will take place a week after the U.S. midterm elections. Biden had previously planned to proceed to Bangkok for a one-day stopover to attend the APEC leaders meeting. Other leaders, including Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, are scheduled to attend. And still ahead after the break. More protests against Putin's mobilization order, while referendums on joining Russia underway in 4 occupied regions in Ukraine. And police arrest 2 on suspicion of links to a car theft syndicate. Welcome back to TVB News. As Russian forces launched new strikes on Ukraine Saturday, Kremlin-orchestrated referendums on joining Russia took place in 4 occupied regions. Meanwhile, police in Russia arrested hundreds of people protesting a mobilization order aimed at beefing up the country's troops in Ukraine. At the same time, the foreign minister of Russia told the UN General Assembly his country had no choice but to take military action against its neighbor. Tracy Furness reports.
As Russian reservists say farewell to their families after Vladimir Putin's order for 300,000 people to be summoned for active duty in Ukraine, protests against the order took place across the country. More than 730 anti-war activists were detained across Russia Saturday as people took to the streets in cities from St. Petersburg to Siberia. The independent OVD Info Protest Monitoring Group said it was aware of detentions in 32 different cities. At least 46 people were detained Saturday in St. Petersburg alone. Many Russian men have tried desperately to leave the country in recent days, buying up scarce and exorbitantly priced plane tickets, while thousands have fled by car. Ukrainian's President Volodymyr Zelensky, in his daily address Saturday, guaranteed Russian soldiers who surrendered to Ukraine forces will be treated according to all conventions. He promised that no one will know the circumstances of their surrender if it is voluntary. And if they are scared to go back to Russia and oppose a swap, Ukraine will find a way to provide for that as well. Meanwhile, hundreds of people protested in Kiev Saturday over the Kremlin-orchestrated referendums in the 4 Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Vladislav Kilchov, who heads I Am Mariupol, said they have gathered people from Mariupol to say no to these fake referendums. The invaders, the occupants, came to our city and they want to take us and Mariupol. They have ruined the city and have killed thousands, he added. TASS has reported that the Duma, Russia's lower house of parliament, may debate bills to incorporate Russian parts of the Ukraine into Russia as soon as September 29th. That's only days after the referendums conclude. At the United Nations General Assembly Saturday, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov defended his country's war in Ukraine. He listed a series of grievances about its neighbor and the West. He said Kiev's continued war against their own people left Russia no choice but to recognize their dependence over the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics and start a special military operation to protect the Russian and other people in the Donbass. India's Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar also addressed the UNGA.
As the Ukraine conflict continues to rage, we are often asked, whose side are we on? And our answer, each time, is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles.
And Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister Don Pramudwinai urged the world's major powers to use upcoming global and regional meetings to be held in Southeast Asia in November as platforms to discuss solutions for the conflict in Ukraine. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Back in Hong Kong, the police have arrested 2 men suspected to be the masterminds behind a car theft syndicate. Authorities said the criminal organization was responsible for 18 cases of car theft, amounting to $1.1 million. Timothy Lee has the story.
These cars here are among some of the stolen vehicles. Many of them had had their parts stripped by the syndicate. Police said the organization began its activities in May. Their methods, sending the organization's drivers in European sports cars to the city streets during the night before searching for easy targets in Hong Kong's open parking lots. Other members would then steal the unprotected vehicles in a matter of minutes. Next, the stolen cars will be driven to remote locations, where they will either have their parts stripped away or be fitted with fake license plates to be utilized for future criminal operations. The New Territories North Regional Crime Unit noted that most of the catalytic converters connected to the exhaust pipes of the stolen hybrid vehicles were stripped away because of its precious metal content. The officers added that the criminals targeted Japanese cars and 7-seaters because of their widespread use in Hong Kong, making their disappearances much less conspicuous. Police arrested 2 men, aged 38, believed to be the masterminds behind the syndicate's operations, for the offenses of car theft and forgery. For reinforcing the protection of vehicles, the force reminded car owners to install cameras on their vehicles and to park the cars in safer parking lots. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Thanks for watching. Bye for now.